Alright, let's do it. The worst place on earth to be stranded. A place with no McDonald's. No! My AmeriFat viewers and me are gonna cry! Ah!
This
No
is
Big
Bennett
Macs!
Island. It's just a rocky, icy outcropping north of Siberia that looks like nothing more than a frozen cliff face rising from the Arctic Ocean. As you might imagine, this is one of the last places on Earth you'd want to be stranded. In 1902, an esteemed Russian scientist was exactly that, left stranded on this island. So this is his horrifying ordeal, and as always, viewer discretion is advised.
Oh my god, this is the 1900s, brother? Chad, they didn't have heaters or electricity in the 1900s or some shit, right? Yeah, it must have been so cold on this island with no electricity. He probably got eaten by a polar bear. Scary.
In the winter of 1903, the chill over the Russian Empire wasn't just from the snow and cold. It was the growing fear that one of the most esteemed scientists, Baron Edward von Toll, had vanished somewhere in the Arctic's white void. Months had passed without any word from him, and the last anyone had heard, he and 3 companions were in good health, camped on Bennett Island. This is an island north of the Siberian mainland, and at that point they were planning their return to the mainland. That note had been dated October 26, 1902, and since then there had been nothing but silence, and so these—
Alana, are you related to him because you're Russian? Yeah, I'm related to everyone. Yeah.
St. Petersburg Academy of Sciences was panicking. Edward wasn't just another explorer chasing a dream, he was a respected geologist, a baron, and a symbol of national pride.
Ooh.
Losing him wasn't just a tragedy, it was a scandal, and so someone had to go after him.
Oh no!
That someone would end up being 29-year-old Naval Lieutenant Alexander Kolchak. Alexander was ambitious, sharp, and driven by a fierce loyalty, and had served under Edward during the expedition that caused Edward to become lost in the first place. This meant he knew the region well, he knew all the risks, and he knew the odds of success were against him, but that didn't matter.
You couldn't pay me enough money to go to some ice block in the middle of the ocean when there's like no GPS, there's no letters, you can't even fly like out pigeon mail. Like, how do you do that? Yeah, frick that, I'm staying home.
When the Academy called for volunteers, Alex stepped forward without hesitation.
No Big Macs.
Now, in the lead up to all of this, and prior to the expedition leaving, Edward was no fool. He wasn't some wide-eyed wanderer or throwing himself at reckless pursuits. Again, he was a respected scientist, and he was also deliberate and deeply rational.
Ooh,
Even rational men, however, aren't immune to obsession, and Edward's was Zemla Sanikova. For decades, rumors had swirled in Arctic circles.
Zemla Sanikova! Dude, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be mean, but when Americans or like Westerners say certain words in Russian, I genuinely can't fucking understand what they're saying until I see like the word written on the screen. Саникова, спасибо, спасибо. У меня тоже русский ужасный, я не могу читать, but at least I'm trying. Yeah.
Of a mysterious land glimpsed beyond the new Siberian islands. Hunters spoke of a dark silhouette on the horizon of a landmass that no map showed. One explorer, Yakov Sanikov, claimed to have seen it while crossing the ice in 1811. He marked it down on his map and gave it his own name, Sanikov's Land. This sliver of a rumor and the legend that grew around it was all Edward needed. He was convinced it existed. And beyond it existing in the first place, he thought it might hold the key to understanding the Arctic's geology, maybe even a kind of last refuge of life from a previous era. So in 1899, when the St. Petersburg Academy of Sciences invited him to lead an expedition to the New Siberian Islands, Edward didn't hesitate and he accepted immediately. After he accepted, constructing—
I feel like they'd be pranking me and saying like, yeah, Alana, let's go research this place in Siberia. And it'd be like, are you guys sending me off to die? Like, do you want me to do that? Because I'll just do it more quickly. I don't want to die.
Again, on the Zarya, which was a sleek hybrid vessel that was part sailing ship and part steam-powered icebreaker. This was custom—
Overwatch! I'm kidding.
Built for Arctic travel. It would be both a home and a lab for the crew and scientists. Then on June 21st, 1900, the Zarya slipped away from St. Petersburg with Edward at the scientific helm and Lieutenant Nikolai, a seasoned Arctic navigator, in command of the ship.
Wow.
They would then travel west around Scandinavia before circling back up north toward the Arctic. And at first, things were cordial. Nikolai respected the chain of command, and Edward respected Nikolai's experience, but their relationship quickly soured.
Wait, how is this colored? I don't think they had colored photographs then. It's so
Before
bad.
long, the tension between them reached a tipping point as the Zarya wintered on Bonnevay Island, about halfway across Siberia. Edward then stripped Nikolai of command and promoted the more agreeable Lieutenant Fyodor Madison. Amid these tensions and personnel changes, another officer separated himself from the others and rose to the occasion and became indispensable to the expedition. This was Alexander, the very same man who would volunteer to rescue Edward several years later. He was a naval man and a researcher, and in April 1901 he joined Edward on a sledge journey to trace the mouth of the Taimyr River. This would be another landmark on their slow creep across the northern Siberian shores. As spring turned to the high north summer, the ice began to melt, but it wasn't until...
Как я люблю твой русский, каждый раз улыбка до ушей. Да ладно, мне похуй, у меня русский ужасный, я не могу ничего читать. Блядь.
September that the Zarya could even attempt to move again. Edward then pushed onward towards Zemla Sanikova and reached somewhere around the larger landmass south of where it was supposed to be. This is a set of islands right between the Laptev Sea and the East Siberian Sea. However, surprisingly quickly, even he was beginning to concede that maybe the island wasn't where it was supposed to be. He then switched his attention to something real, which was Bennett Island. Bennett Island is also north of these islands.
Oh, this is Siberia, yeah. Chat, how many of you live in Siberia? I live in Siberia.
And conveniently not far from where Sanikov's Phantom Land was supposedly located. Edward reasoned that maybe Sanikov's land had been a mirage. Maybe it was Bennett Island all along, seen at a strange angle under a strange light. It was a stretch, but Edward was running out of time and out of ice-free months. And already, despite freeing the ship and scouting the area a little bit, thickening ice floes forced the Zarya to winter once more, this time on Kotelny Island, about 186 miles or 300 kilometers from Bennett Island.
Oh, dude, this this island's tiny. There's no Big Macs on there at all. This one could have a McDonald's.
300 kilometers from Bennett Island. Over the course of the winter, Edward began to plan a dog sled expedition. He planned to leave in spring and instructed the Zarya to try to reach Bennett Island by the summer to meet him.
That's cool.
If they couldn't get there by September 3rd, 1902, he would return to the mainland alone. Edward set out from Kotelny Island in June 1902 with 3 men, sleds packed with supplies, dogs, and limited ammunition. Edward knew the Zarya was supposed to meet them on Bennett Island, but the window for the ship to move was ridiculously small. The ice had to melt, but not too quickly, the winds had to shift, but not too harshly, and nature, as usual, didn't cooperate. Throughout July and August, Fyodor and the Zarya crew waited for the ice floes to break up. When the thaw finally came, though, a period of heavy wind pushed the block where the Zarya was moored far off.
Fun fact, Siberia is actually really hot in the summer. Yeah, it can get up to like 40 degrees Celsius. It can get pretty hot. Maybe not like this close to the ocean, but yeah.
Of course, forced them to spend days regaining their position. Then when they finally got moving again, they tried hugging the northern coast of Kotelny Island, but they were stopped by heavy ice. They then tried the southern route and made better progress until they hit another wall. As September loomed, Fyodor gave it one final shot. With time running out and fuel stores dwindling,
Dude, they had to like break up the ice and then move forward like inches at a time, bro. That's fucked up. Dude, imagine falling in there. You'd freaking die.
Steered the Zarya back north one last time toward Bennett Island. Again, though, the ship was halted by impassable floes, and this time there would be no more chances. The Zarya had reached the end of its line. The ship...
Oh, it's this instrument where you can measure, like, the distance or something? I forget what it's called. I've seen this before in, like, a museum or something, right? A sextant? Chat, you're trolling. Why is it called a sextant? You can't have sex with it. Mods, start banning everyone that's saying sextants. That's inappropriate. Yeah. Not trying hard enough? Chat, you... Sextant
was too low and cold to continue and too far from safety to risk staying frozen in. So, with heavy hearts, Fyodor and the crew turned back, leaving Bennett Island behind them and Edward with it. Admirably, though, they didn't quit outright. No. The Zarya crew may have been battered and cold, but they weren't about to leave on their own without a fight. Even after abandoning the push for Bennett Island, they left men behind to wait at various points, hoping Edward might eventually appear. One man was left on the Fedayevsky Peninsula. Then another man remained at Cape Vysoky, supplied and ready in case
Vysoky, блядь!
Edward returned.
Vysoky.
The weeks, however, soon turned to months, with still no sign of him. So by December of 1902, unfortunately, the bulk of the crew returned to St. Petersburg after abandoning the Zarya on the northern coast of the Siberian mainland. They gave the reports that scientific progress had been made and the Arctic had been mapped, but the man who started it all was still out there somewhere, maybe alive and maybe not. And upon their return, the Academy of Sciences was torn. Some believed Edward must be dead, others couldn't accept that. And so on December 9th, 1902, they gathered to decide what to do next, and Alex and Fyodor were summoned to weigh in. Fyodor, having witnessed the futility firsthand, advised against any—
That's not a very Russian last name. Was there a lot of, like, cultural overlap, like, back then? Like, was there just people that had, like, non-Russian last name? Because Fyodor is, like, a normal Russian name, but then Mati-sen kind of looks like my dad, low-key. Not doxing, just a little bit.
further actions.
It's cool.
According to him, it was too dangerous, but Alexander wasn't ready to bury Edward just yet. He had no illusions about the Arctic. He had been there and seen it in action, but he also knew Edward, and he couldn't shake the image of a man still alive out there, stubbornly pushing south through snowstorms, surviving on instincts and scraps, and waiting for rescue. So, when the Academy hesitated, Alexander stepped forward and offered to lead a new expedition.
Dude, what a Giga Chad!
One that wouldn't rely on ships or theoretical windows of thawing. Instead, they'd go overland with sleds and a whaleboat. They'd follow the trail by muscle, by dog, and by sheer determination. The plan was practically insane, and yet somehow it was approved. By mid-January 1903, Alexander had received funding and official backing. He then sent a telegraph to his fiancée, postponing their upcoming wedding before packing up and heading—
He kind of actually just Sigma-mailed and said, "I'm pausing the wedding, woman." Bros before hoes? Yeah, dude. She's got a nice hat. I like her hat. It's poofy.
For the ice. By the time Alexander officially took command of the 1903 rescue expedition, it was already clear that this wasn't a routine trip. The ice was melting.
Sorry, I just keep getting hung up on the fact that he canceled the wedding and said, "I need to go save my dude first before we get married." And you're thinking in the 1900s, you're probably like, damn, he's probably not gonna come back, huh?
Unpredictably, the Zarya was abandoned. Half the Academy didn't think the rescue would succeed, but Alexander didn't care. For him, failure wasn't an option because in his mind, Edward wasn't dead. After leaving, he first headed to Mezin and the White Sea coast, where he began recruiting men tough enough to face what lay ahead. He then recruited 6 Pomors, who were the seasoned local coastal hunters who knew how to survive in Siberia and read the ice. These men apparently didn't flinch when told they'd be hauling sleds and boats across frozen wastelands. They just nodded.
Dude, some of these dudes just like were born in Siberia and they just like lived their life and were like, alright, it's time for an adventure. This is the original MMO experience. Like, realistically, how bored you have to be in Siberia. If some guy walks up to you and says, "Hey, we're gonna go on an adventure and go save someone," you just be like, alright, I have nothing else better to do. There's no TV, there's no phone, there's no internet. Like, you're just reading books and shit.
Packed their gear and showed up on time to leave.
I guess.
After that, he was also soon joined by 2 veterans of the Zarya, Nikifor, the expedition's boatswain, and Vasily, the helmsman. Nikifor, given his experience, didn't waste time sugarcoating things. He flat out told Alexander that hauling new boats from Mezin was a waste of effort. Instead, he convinced him to salvage an old whaleboat sitting near the abandoned Zarya at Tiksi Bay. This is the bay almost directly southwest of Bennett Island on the Siberian mainland. As they made their way eastward afterward, logistics were a nightmare as Alexander had to source dogs, sleds, food, ammunition, and Arctic gear, all while racing against the clock. Even still, by early March, all 17 members of the expedition had convened in Yakutsk. It was there that the true expedition began. That is. They then traveled down the Elden River and its tributary, the Nera, until they reached Verkhoyansk. Then another month later, on April 10th, they arrived in the village of Kazachi on the Yana River. It was there that Alexander got bad news. There were apparently problems securing the whaleboat at Tiksi Bay, and without it, the rescue might fail even before it began. He then rushed to the bay, hoping to solve the problem himself, but when he arrived, he found that someone had beaten him to it.
It's so eerie seeing this picture. I don't know what it is, but like, this is the tip of the world, right? Like, that way is like nothing. It's like there's just this cove and there's nothing around. There's no mountains, no trees. Trees can't grow there. Because it's all just tundra. Or trees can't go in the tundra. What am I talking about? No, it's kind of like just sand and shit and beaches and ice.
The whaleboat was secured, waiting and ready, and so was Fyodor of all people. It's not entirely clear if Alexander knew he'd be meeting Fyodor, or if this was just a coincidence, but he certainly must have been a sight for sore eyes. Theodore was apparently there to oversee the ship's final dismantling and sale. Shortly afterward, with the whaleboat secured and loaded, the dogs fed, and the men prepared, Alexander turned north again toward Bennett Island. By early May 1903, the expedition reached the northernmost settlement.
Okay, hold on. Gay. How do you say this one? Chat, there's a lot of fucking consonants. How do you say this?
On the Siberian mainland. From there was no more land beyond
ads
it.
Are gay.
Ice...
Wait, ads are gay.
Wind and the far-off promise of the islands they'd been to the year before.
Get ads.
And on May 5th, Alexander and his team crossed into that frozen unknown. 17 men and 10 sleds, each pulled by 13 dogs.
Yay,
then among
doggies.
them, the whaleboat was literally pulled across the ice on 2 massive sledges, requiring the brute force of 30 dogs and a handful of grumbling men. And despite the incredible endurance they're known for,
dude, look at his beard, it's all frozen and shit. Those little doggies.
The difficulty, the dogs refused to work more than 6 hours at a time.
Only 6 hours of dog sledding.
Unfortunately, the humans didn't have that luxury. Movement also actually happened at night when the ice was firmer. By day, they rested in makeshift camps, and at any time, the temperatures could drop low enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes.
Oh my god.
This wasn't just a rescue mission, it was a...
Oh, and you know they had to cuddle those dogs for warmth, too. Imagine a little doggy pile!
war of attrition fought against cold, time, and exhaustion. On May 23rd, they reached Kotelny Island once again and stopped to regroup. The ice wasn't ready for boats yet, so they hunted to supplement their supplies and prepared the whaleboat for open water. During this, they spent most of their time skinning seals, mending gear, and staying alive. Weeks passed and the ice groaned and cracked under their feet, but finally, by July 18th, the waters began to open. It was finally time, and the team then split into 2. A forward group of 7 set out first in the whaleboat, scouting a path through the ice fields. The others then followed in stages. Sailing was impossible in many places, so they rowed. When they couldn't row, they dragged, and where they couldn't drag, they waited for nature to give them a break. Along the way, they also stumbled on fragments of the past expedition, and not just supplies. On July 26th, they found the man left at the Fadiyevsky Peninsula. He was still manning his lonely outpost and waiting for a sign from Edward. Disturbingly though, there hadn't been one. Then, farther ahead on Cape Vyasoki, they found the other man who'd been stationed to assist Edward should he return. He was still there, tending to a camp like a man trapped in a paused moment.
That's crazy,
but again,
dude.
there was no word or sign from Edward.
How far away is it from the Bennett Island, though?
Already spent a day resting at the camp before pressing on. From there, they sailed through...
What's that detox thing about... You know, when you go on an airplane and you just have nothing to look at? I forget what it's called. This is the ultimate detoxing of, like... the dopamine detox, that's what it was called.
Recently opened waters using oars and sails, navigating between chunks of drifting ice. Then on August 4th, they finally reached their destination of Bennett Island.
Ooh.
Alexander then set foot on the island Edward risked everything to reach. It was essentially a sheer, icy, rocky cliff almost all the way around except for a few flatter areas.
Why?
It was wild, wind-battered, and hauntingly empty, but just moments after reaching Cape Emma on one side, they made a discovery. It was a bottle, and inside the bottle was a note and a map. After months
oh my god, dude, how fucking cool is that?
of chasing him, here was a bottle tucked into the rocks with Edward's unmistakable handwriting inside.
Oh my
It had been
Lord.
waiting there for nearly a year, sealed against the elements. Using the map, Alexander, Nikifor, and one of the other expedition members set off to locate Edward's last known camp. They then navigated across fractured ice, jagged terrain, and pushing deeper into the island's interior. And during this, while leaping over a crevasse in the ice, Alexander...
These are the real pictures, man. This isn't an island. This is a fucking iceberg.
misjudged the distance and plunged into the freezing Arctic water. He was then pulled out, soaking wet and half frozen, and immediately stripped down and redressed by his men. As horrifying as this might have been to most people, this was hardly an incident, and the group kept moving. Then finally, they reached the camp on the far side of Bennett Island, and Alexander found what he had come for, but not in the way anyone had hoped. There were no people, no footprints, and no bodies, just more relics. Scattered around the makeshift shelter were scientific instruments, boxes of geological samples, and a partially buried diary. Alexander then read every line of it, and it confirmed what the note hinted at. It said that Edward and 3 of his companions had reached Bennett Island on July 21st, 1902. They found that the land was surprisingly rich in wildlife, including reindeer, Arctic birds, and bears. In theory, this should have been more than enough to sustain them. And for weeks afterwards, they lived off the land, and food wasn't a problem, at least not at first. This was where a crucial mistake was made. Instead of setting up long-term provisions and fortifying their camp, Edward bet everything on the Zarya arriving again. By the time they realized the ship wasn't coming, it was already late October. Their ammunition was nearly gone.
So all the animals left or something?
Reindeer had migrated and the sea was freezing over. They then made a decision that still baffles historians to this day. They left. Edward's final diary entry was dated October 26, 1902 and read, quote, "Today we start on the return trip south. Our traveling supplies are good for 14 to 20 days. We are all in good health," end quote.
No.
And that was it. No more notes, no other final words, just a calm confidence in the face of impossible odds.
How many other people lived like this and did what they did and just didn't give a frick? I don't know, Chad. I think we're all kind of pussies compared to these people 100 years ago, huh? And to think this is only 120 years ago? That's crazy. We're such spoiled little rats. Like sitting in our chairs, being fat, eating Big Macs. Yeah, back in my day.
Alexander then spent 3 days scouring the island, only to find nothing. There was no sign of what happened to Edward and his men. It was like they'd simply been erased by
They kind of look like Akitas. Sorry, I'll go back.
It was like they'd simply been erased by the wind. And once they were satisfied that they'd searched every inch of Bennett Island, Alexander made the call no one wanted to make. It was time to go. The men had risked everything to come here, but the trail was gone and the Arctic was shifting again. Alexander and his men then turned south again. There was no ceremony or moment of reflection, just a boat pushed off the island shore on August 7th, 1903. They then reached an old camp on the larger islands by August 14th and rested there for 3 days. And the men were weary, but not just from the physical grind, but from the defeat they had met at every turn. They had traveled thousands of miles through frozen hell to find that they might never get answers. Alex then decided to complete one last survey of the larger islands, hoping for any sign that Edward had made it off Bennett Island alive. But again, he found nothing, no shelters, no sled tracks, and no more notes and bottles. And fall was coming fast now, and the ice was forming again.
That's so bad.
Soon, open water would be hard to come by, and in fact, they would end up having to wait nearly 2 months.
Sign yourself up for a polar expedition, Alana. No, it's not the same, because you can get saved by, like, helicopters, and, you have GPS and navigate. I'm talking about, like, this no bullshit, no maps, you have a compass, a sextant, you can't have sex with it, but it's a sextant, like, I don't know, it's still different, nah. Don't take your phone or GPS. I don't know if they're legally allowed to do that.
For the sea to freeze solid enough to resume travel by sled.
What am I even living
Finally,
for?
in early December, the ice was solid, so they began on sleds once again. Alexander continued forward with the last leg of the expedition looming before him, and then, in Kazachi village, something surreal happened. Amid the bitter cold, Alexander found his fiancée waiting for him.
What?
She made the journey to meet him, not knowing if he was alive or if he even made it to Bennett Island. But
what a woman! No, is this like a hallucination or real? What a woman!
there she was, bundled and pale, with news that was surprisingly desperate. Apparently, the Academy of Sciences, she said, had lost hope. They'd all but written the expedition off, and there had actually been talk of calling it back, but the communication had failed to reach them. For weeks,
these women, they hear about their man going off, like, into the army, and then they cheat on them because they're like, fuck, I don't want to wait, like, 9 months or whatever, or, like, years until they come back, from, like, I don't know, I don't know World Wars, but I don't know how long they go away for, but they go away for a while, and this woman's like, I'm gonna go meet him. I don't know, man. They don't build women like this anymore.
No one in the capital had known where Alexander was, or if he was still alive at all. He had risked everything to bring news back, and no one was even sure if he was coming.
Wow.
Luckily, this wasn't the case, so on January 26, 1904, Alexander reached Yakutsk and wired his report to St. Petersburg. In it, he explained that Edward had reached Bennett Island and survived there for more than 3 months.
They had Morse code in the 1900s. Yeah, they did. Yeah, they had that.
Then, for reasons that are not entirely clear, he left and likely died while crossing the ice to the mainland. Upon getting this information, newspapers printed Edward's last note in full, and scientists pored over Alexander's findings.
Oh no!
The public then mourned the loss of a man who had devoted his life to finding a land that probably never existed in the first place. As for Alexander, he kept moving forward. Now, it's never entirely clear how well a sense of time is established throughout these stories, but in this case, they were apparently gone long enough and hope was bad enough that he'd almost been forgotten about.
Aww.
Upon his return, though, his name was suddenly everywhere, attached to one of the boldest Arctic operations Russia had ever mounted.
Wow.
As for Edward, there were no grand pronouncements or
He didn't do it for the glory. He just wanted to get back his boy.
poetic epitaphs, just a factual note in his diary and a quiet vanishing into the Arctic.
He just died.
The
like
island
that,
had provided enough to live, but not to last, and by the time they realized they had waited too long to leave, the choice was gone. They could either stay and starve or walk out into the cold and hope to reach salvation on foot. In the end, they chose the latter, and it was probably the last choice they ever made.
Shit.
By contrast, Alexander's expedition, although it failed to find the men alive, was considered a resounding success. It returned without the loss of a single life, and it brought back scientific samples, cartographic data, and precious insights into the treacherous conditions of the new Siberian islands. More than that, however, it honored Edward and closed the story with truth and not myth.
Yay!
As a result, in 1906, Alexander was awarded the Constantine Medal by the Russian Geographical Society, which was its highest honor.
Wow.
And in the end, following the two expeditions and decades later, the truth was finally learned. Edward had died chasing a place that didn't exist. In the 1950s, American satellite imaging confirmed that the Zemlya Sanikova was a mirage. It was simply atmospheric trickery, just a convincing reflection on the horizon.
It was a mirage? Wait, you can have mirages outside of the desert? I thought mirages were only in the desert. Well, I guess if light refracts in the right way, huh? Wow.
If you made it this far, thanks so much for watching. If you have a story suggestion, feel free to submit it to the forum found in the description.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
Also, if you want to support the channel, consider joining the Patreon or becoming a channel member here on YouTube. Anyways, thanks again, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.
I love this guy. I love his voice. It's so relaxing. Chat, it's time for a nap.